Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. So let's start the parallel session on parallel session 1, 2, ensuring just transition, enabling empowerment and enhancing knowledge and skills of the Synergy Conference. My name is Akio Takemoto, Program Head of UNU Institute for Advanced Study of Sustainability. Thank you for joining physically and online. As you may know, through the conference, we are organizing 6 parallel sessions today. So this session, directed by distinguished guest speakers to make you a deep dive discussion specific to very important topic, the synergy between climate action and social agenda, such as poverty eradication, gender equality, reduction of inequality, creation of jobs, as well as solution for enhancing synergy through empowerment, capacity building, and education. First, I'd like to invite Professor Shinobu Yamaguchi, Director of UNUIS, to provide keynote statement. Provide opening remarks. Floor is yours. Yeah, you can. Private speech there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, distinguished guests and colleagues and participants. Welcome you all. And thank you very much for joining this parallel session on ensuring just transitions, enabling empowerment and enhancing knowledge and skills. It is my great pleasure as the director of the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of the Sustainability to be opening this session on such a critical topic. As we have been discussing in this conference on the importance of synergies between climate actions and other SDGs, I'd like to once again highlight some issues between the element, particularly in the context of science and education. And this is features prominently in the conference background note, but also, more importantly, it was also explored in the dedicated side event of the high-level political forum earlier this month, organized by the United Nations University, UNDESA, UNFCCC, and other partners. To provide a context for this important session, I have 3 brief messages in my opening statement. First, spotlighting the gaps in synergies across key systems and the need for the systemic transformation. With the evidence, the UN Global Sustainable Development Report 2019 called for integrated action across 6 key entry points, namely human well-being, sustainable and just economies, food systems, and energy decarbonization, urban development, and the global environmental commons as the most efficient way to achieve the sustainable development. And among these entry points, according to the IPCC 6 assessment report, for urban development, there are strong synergies between key climate change mitigation options and SDGs. So that is very good news. Yet still, we have to remember, for more than half of the surveyed mitigation options and SDGs, synergies are absent or remain only partially realized. In fact, some of those mitigation options with the greatest knowledge gap include transport, energy, industry, and agriculture. So this shows that we must transform these systems through effective governance and policy tools for finance, science and technology and partnerships. And last but not least, through enhancing capacity building and education. Second point, I want to ask you a question, all the audience, in person and online. Where, meaning which dimension of SDGs do you think the knowledge gap exists when trying to identify the synergies and trade-offs between climate action? Answer me. Is it economic dimension or the environment dimension or the social dimensions? What do you think? Brilliant. Yes. They're mainly on the social dimensions that we can identify the evident gaps. While the climate action can produce the co-benefit with SDGs, uneven impacts are evident. And in fact, the review of the very important nationally determined contributions, NDCs, shows that socially oriented SDGs are highly underrepresented in NDCs, nationally determined contributions, compared to the environment and the economic goals. And the examples are quite shocking because the gaps exist in SDG 3, health and well-being, SDG 4, quality education, SDG 5, gender equality, and SDG 10, reduced inequalities. This evidence very concerning because social equity and inclusiveness must be at the center of just, inclusive, and equitable transitions. In 2018 already, the IPCC special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees clearly mentioned that social acceptance is essential to realize net zero emissions by the middle of the century. I trust this must be at the core of the synergetic action on climate and sustainable development. In this context, I am very pleased today to reaffirm the strong commitment of our institute, United Nations University, to the integrated implementation on the Paris Agreement and 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development through research and educational program. United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of the Sustainability advances interdisciplinary research on sustainability in our thematic areas of governance and climate change, biodiversity, the water resource management, and innovation and education. And our strategy is to integrate expertise across these areas and between academia and policymaking. That we are developing as a very concrete program, a new postgraduate degree specialization on the Paris Agreement to be delivered from autumn 2023. It will be the first of its kind to be offered by a UN organization. The learners in this program will develop skills to play a leading role in implementing the Paris Agreement, that is, to achieve decarbonization and build the resilient and sustainable societies in the coming decades. Ladies and gentlemen, in seeking synergies to advance transformative action on climate change and sustainable development, we all share the responsibility to ensure that the solution that we choose leave no one behind. So I hope today's discussion will identify very effective and realistic approaches and build the partnership for enhancing capacity building, empowerment and education, and ultimately contribute toward ensuring a sustainable future for all of us. Thank you very much for your attention and enjoy the session. Back to you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yamaguchi, for introduction to the latest knowledge on climate action and social agenda. So let's go on to the keynote presentation. So I'd like to invite Ms. Deborah Lee, who is IPCC 6 lead author and belonging to Economic Affairs Officer, Energy and Natural Resources at UN ECLAC, Economic Commission of Latin American Caribbeans. So Ms. Deborah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Hello.
Oh,
thank you very much for the invitation. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and I can show your slides. So please start your presentation. Thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Okay, well, thanks again. Thank you again for the invitation. It's an honor to be able to participate here and share with you the findings of the last IPCC report with regards to the synergy between climate action and sustainable development goals. As was mentioned in the opening remarks, the IPCC in its 6th assessment cycle introduced the multidimensional feasibility assessment, first in its special report on global warming at 1.5 degrees C, and then in working groups 2 and working groups 3 through this figure which you can see here where we have the 6 dimensions of economic, technological, institutional, social, environmental, and geophysical dimensions. And equity is introduced in several places, as can be seen in the specific indicator. Low feasibility, mostly seen under the institutional dimensions, can also be interpreted as dimensions that face different barriers or challenges. And here we can see some of the indicators that went into the feasibility assessment and that can also go into different monitoring and evaluation strategies. So we can see, for example, under institutional dimension, the political acceptability, legal regulatory frameworks, and under social cultural co-benefits, which are usually with the sustainable development goals, social cultural acceptability, social and regional inclusiveness, intergenerational equity, and gender equity. Something important to mention here is that since the launch of the special report on global warming at 1.5 degree to when AR6 was developed, there was a significant increase in the number of publications in scientific literature on the social cultural dimension. In this slide, we focus a little bit more on the land and ocean ecosystem system transitions. And as a side note, we use system transitions as it's the framework that allows a better integration between adaptation and mitigation measures together with sustainable development. Here, I'd like to highlight the forest-based adaptation, which is the third line, in which we can see a combination of medium to high feasibility across the 6 dimensions, with strong synergies with mitigation, making options here desirable. And if we can see here, forest-based adaptation also in the third line, we can see that it has a positive nexus across most of the sustainable development goals. Actually, most of the options listed here also have synergies with the sustainable development goals, and these spaces that are blank indicate that there is not sufficient literature today to do the assessment. But there's also the synergy of mitigation options with sustainable development goals. For example, options in urban areas not only absorb and store carbon, but at the same time can achieve many other sustainable development goals, as you can see in the squares in this graph. And within agriculture and forestry, potential conflicts between reducing emissions and sustainable development, particularly around land use and the need to ensure access to food, water, and energy, can be managed with the right policies, investments, and financial partnerships. So between these figures here of the mitigation and sustainable development goals, together with the assessment of adaptation with synergies with mitigation and sustainable development goals, we have a suite of options that can meet the three different objectives. But what AR6 also shows us is climate resilient development. And evidence is clear that we need to be acting faster and linking adaptation with mitigation and sustainable development. Climate resilient development links the limiting of emissions, warming levels, and climate risks with planetary health, with an end goal of human and ecosystem flourishing. The iterative nature of development is that the sustainable development dimensions like equity and justice, reduced poverty, ecosystem health are right at the center of climate action, not just as desirable goals, but as effective and central to effective action. And in contrast, unsustainable development outcomes and actions follow a red pathway. But what we can see here is that we don't have just two different pathways. We can have multiple pathways that are guided by deeper societal adaptation and system transitions. And these actions take years to become effective. If we can see the dotted line at the top, this indicates pathways that we've already lost due to past actions or decisions. So we have a closing window of opportunity that is underpinned by societal choices that result in multiple decisions made by multiple actors in diverse arenas of engagement, like economic and financial, knowledge and technology, ecological, political, sociocultural, and community. And these are the dimensions that enable the societal choices towards higher climate resilient development, which also include knowledge diversity, ecosystem stewardship, equity, justice, and inclusion. And the opposite happens when we don't enable climate resilient development, in which we have singular knowledge, ecosystem degradation, exclusion, inequity, and injustice. So here is the summary of the figure we just unpacked right now into looking at how this integration of mitigation, adaptation, and the sustainable goals together with different values and knowledge systems, including equity and justice and inclusion, can help shape a sustainable and desirable future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I think it's midnight in your country, so, but I hope that you will stay home if possible. So I'd like to ask you a question on the possibility of deep dive assessment that will be conducted by IPCC in the future if possible. And thank you. Thanks, Deborah and IPCC for publishing valuable assessment reports, including knowledge and synergy between climate and SDGs. And our conference organization team incorporated these key findings in the IPCC reports into the conference background note. That would be, I hope that will be incorporated in summary report of the conference. Thank you very much for your contribution. So then, so let's go on to the panel discussion. Yeah, we have 8 distinguished guests participated here and online, and also video message. So first, let's watch the video message by Ms. Maria Antonia Guin Ramirez, member of Governing Council of Itaipu Binacional, Paraguay. So, Secretariat, please show the video.
Good morning to everyone, or good afternoon, depending on which side of the world you are joining us from. Thank you very much to the United Nations and the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share some thoughts and examples from South America at this global conference. I will briefly discuss some of the actions of Itaipu, a binational entity created in 1973 by a treaty between Paraguay and Brazil, designed to make possible the production and subsequent management of hydropower. Today, Itaipu has one of the world's highest outputs of clean and renewable energy. It has generated 2.8 billion megawatt hours of clean energy. If we compare this with other sources of energy, then we find that we are avoiding millions of tons of carbon emissions into our atmosphere. Itaipu further promotes projects such as the installation of solar panels in isolated areas, use of biodigester or biogas cooking stove in natural reserves, and promotes the use of sustainable mobility with electrical vehicles. Itaipu furthers the protection and management of our watercourses and of the biodiversity. It has helped create an advanced climate monitoring platform as well as brought about actions that have resulted in the recovery of watersheds and springs and of the control of water quality and sedimentation. There are 101,000 hectares of protected areas under Itaipu jurisdiction. Itaipu carries out one of the biggest reforestation projects in South America with native plants and fruit. It does help substantially to restore the Atlantic forest of Alto Paraná. These actions contribute to SDGs 6, 7, and 13. In fact, UNDESA has recognized Itaipu for its action on all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So to conclude, we are all living a crucial moment in history. It is up to all of us to avoid further increasing global warming and to help our future generations with the impacts of climate change. In our path to fulfilling the commitments of the Paris Agreement and the implementation of the SDGs, all actors are important: states, non-state actors, civil society. Everyone all over the world is experiencing the impacts of climate change. We can face these challenges together, building a more sustainable future for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maria, for providing great video messages. So let's go to the next speaker. I'd like to invite Mr. Mustafa Kamal Gay, Coordinator Green Jobs Program, International Labour Organization, ILO. Mr. Mustafa, can you hear my voice? Hello.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for joining for this important session. So for you, of course, you are working for the ILO. The mission of your organization is to enhance green jobs, transformation from the jobs working for the traditional energy-intensive industries, and to for the work contribute to the net zero emission as well as the SDGs, I believe. So I'd like to hear your views on this matter. Over to yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to UNDESA and UN organizers for inviting the International Labour Organization to contribute to the session. I think when we consider the SDGs and the Paris Agreement on climate change, at the center of the objective of governments and our member states and people is ambition for action. But I wanted to start with a statement that ambition is not about numbers. Ambition is about people. It is about making people able to bring the economic and social changes that will make it possible to transform our models of production and consumption in such ways that reduce carbon emissions and the intensity in the use of resources. Now, from that perspective, there is an important role that actors in the world of work, business, employees organizations, workers organizations have to play. And I think here I would like to echo what Director Yamaguchi said earlier in terms of the gap we see on social dimensions in NDCs in particular. There is a very clear objective in the Paris Agreement to ensure that as we pursue climate action, that it leads to well-being, that it leads to more and better jobs, that we ensure, as it is central to the SDGs, that no one is left behind. But to do that requires that first, in terms of the process, governments work together very closely with actors in the real economy. It is just not possible to change economic and social systems without business, without workers and trade unions that actually work in the economy and society. And second, in terms of the policies, they must be complementary. Social policies are actually enablers of climate and environmental action. It is only when we have the right skills, the expertise of the workforce, that we can achieve efficiency in the use of energy and materials. It is when we can have innovation in enterprises that models of production and the way business is done is improved to be more efficient, both in terms of labor productivity, but also resource productivity. So therefore, social dialogue, as we call it, where governments engage with social partners is just absolutely critical to align those policies. Now, I just want to end in the first round by saying that there is this sort of fear that when we take into account the social dimensions, the jobs, the equity, you complicate something that is already complicated. And I want to say that is not the case because all of the studies and analysis we have conducted at the ILO and by others tell us that we are on a positive narrative, that it is possible to achieve ambition on the SDGs and climate on the one hand, and deliver millions of additional jobs and income at the same time. You know, our own assessment tells us that a circular economy and a low carbon economy could generate 100 million jobs by 2030. Now, there is also a side to it, which is that there is going to be transformation and that could lead to loss of jobs. If the right policies, the alignment of skills, social and labor, environmental policies are not done, there is a risk of losing up to 80 million jobs in that process. So therefore, I just come back to what colleagues and earlier speakers have said very well, and which has been made very clear in the last IPCC report, that equity, just transitions are enablers of ambition. And that ambition is not about numbers, it is about people. So I just would like to end here, Chair, and I very much look forward to an interaction and exchange with other panel members. And I very much regret not having been able to be there. I've been 12 years at IGES in Japan and worked very closely with my former colleagues at UNU. So it's unfortunate that we could not be there with you, but this is already a privilege to be connecting online. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mustafa, for your very encouraging and strong message. And now take note that ambition to back people. So this is very important, strong message. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for staying on for a little bit time. So the next speaker, Ms. Marimita Mohanty, Program Management Officer, Renewable Energy, United Nations Environment Program. Parimita, can you hear my voice?
Yes,
hello.
Very clearly.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much for joining. So I received that you would like to speak about gaps and needs on the empowerment and capacity building of stakeholders. So I'd like to know your views on gaps and needs and solutions from the context of just and inclusive transformation towards decarbonized and climate resilient society for Wise Earth.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And it's our privilege to be here, of course, virtually, in this very important and timely event. And of course, I would like to, all the earlier speakers have already mentioned about the relevance and the importance of creating the synergies between Paris climate actions and SDGs. So I would focus more on how can we empower different stakeholders to achieve the goals and the targets. So when we talk about that, the most important point is who are those stakeholders? So we have to be very clear while implementing the projects or the actions that who are those important stakeholders, whose capacity needs to be enhanced. So in that regard, of course, we have, let's say we have climate action. So we have climate related stakeholders. We have energy initiatives. We have energy related stakeholders. But at the same time, we have to bring stakeholders from other sectors, from other classes. For example, civil societies, private sectors, financing institutions, women's groups and associations, they should also be involved in various implementation of various climate actions. It's not only on climate change stakeholders. We have to bring different sectoral stakeholders to be in the same table to discuss about the cross-sectoral linkages that exist, and because of which all those impact happens. So unless and until we create that platform, then it would be in a silos. It would be all those action plans or roadmaps will be prepared in a more isolated manner, which would definitely not the objective of achieving SDGs or climate actions targets. So we have to create that platforms. So maybe a kind of community of practices where we can bring multi-stakeholders and understand their needs. That's also important. That's also very important to understand the needs of different stakeholders and create the action-oriented and practical implementable actions. For example, we may have very good policies in place, but if the regulatory framework, if the institutional structure are not in place, then maybe we would not be able to implement the whole policy. And if we won't get the ownership and the buy-in from different stakeholders, then we would not be able to implement those targets. So we have to take care of, we have to create different evidence and the catalog and handhold those different stakeholders, get their buy-in, and then implement the project and take them in the whole process of implementation. So that's important. So stakeholder mapping, cross-sectoral linkages, and creating platforms where different cross-sectoral stakeholders can share their opinion, and then prepare practical and implementable implementation plan while involving various stakeholders in the whole process are the steps or are some of the interventions that we have to take care of. As far as how to bring them to the decision-making table, that's again where we have to focus much more on the policies and roadmaps and action plans and involve those stakeholders. I would like to take some examples what we are trying to do in few of our interventions in the ASEAN region. For example, in ASEAN, ASEAN has different platforms. So we have subsector network, we have different renewable energy, energy efficiency, and other working groups. So how can we make sure that gender equality, I'm just taking one example of that, but similarly, different stakeholder group needs to be included in that. But how can we make sure that in those subsector network, in those working groups, gender equality can also be considered? How women can also participate equally in all those decision-making process. So can we develop a kind of action plan and roadmap on how to include gender equality in various climate change policies and programs? Can we establish those processes? Can we establish those institutional structure so that it would be automatically come? We don't have to actually forcefully or enforce those things. So we have to have the natural structure in place. And then handhold women associations, civil societies to raise their voice. So we have to work in both the sides. We have to work with the policymakers, state and non-state actors. We also have to work with the similar target groups to bring their confidence up and help them to participate in decision-making process. And in the whole process, we have to create the whole evidence on how this can be done so that it can be replicated in other parts. And then lastly, I would say, as far as the knowledge platform and capacity building is concerned, with digitalizations and access to ITs and ICTs, we should also use those platforms and then see how can we create more evidence and use the digital platform to spread those best practices, learnings. How can we foster more exposure visit, peer-to-peer learning, and kind of learning while doing? If we can establish a structure around that for capacity building and continuous handholding of different stakeholders, I believe we would be in a better position to create more synergies between SDGs and Paris agreements. So with this, I would stop here, but I would definitely like to interact more even today or in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paramita. Thank you very much, the leadership of UNEP for the empowerment through the establishing platform to gather all kinds of different types of stakeholders. So I believe that social acceptance is a necessary condition to achieve the carbon neutrality and climate resilient development. And also I'm impressed by your activities to empower the knowledge on the gender equality and digitalization. Thank you very much. So the next, I'd like to invite the guest speakers in a gathering here in the meeting place. First, I'd like to invite Ms. Yasuko Kamiyama, Professor, University of Tokyo, Senior Principal Researcher, National Institute for Environment Studies. Yeah, Yasuko, sorry. I know we are old friends. I know that you have been engaged in the study on politics and international climate change policy. So motivation of this conference is raising awareness on the importance of synergy between climate and social agenda for the international framework. So thank you very much for your idea. Project.
Thank you, Akio, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here and giving me an opportunity to give my brief comments on the relationship between climate change and social justice and SDGs. As Akio kindly introduced, my background is international relations, and I've been observing the negotiation under UNFCCC for more than 30 years. So I'm fully aware that there's still a wide gap or inequality remaining between countries, rich and poor countries. However, when we want to talk about the relationship in climate change, mitigation and adaptation policies and SDG goals, it becomes much more important to see the internal inequality inside each country. Because each country has its own unique national circumstances. So you really have to see much in detail, see where you can see the nexus or synergies or trade-offs between climate change policies and other social goals. So I would like to just give you an example of how I feel in Japan on this issue. Before I came here, the organizer gave me some guiding questions, and I chose two of them. One is how can underrepresented stakeholder groups be empowered? Or how can their participation decision-making processes of climate action and SDGs be facilitated? Looking at these two questions, I felt that these questions are based on preconditions. It means that involvement of stakeholders is a good thing, and leaving no one behind is a good thing. Of course, I agree. And I'm sure all of us who are inside this building would also agree. However, if you go out of this building and talk to the people walking on the street in Japan, I'm not sure if all of them would agree to this precondition. Because some of them may not be interested in getting engaged in decision-making on climate change, or becoming or empowered even to participate in decision-making, because they are not interested in climate change. They have other things which they consider as to be important. It may be aging society, or it may be COVID-19. It may be inflation due to rising energy prices. There are lots of other social and economic issues they have to take into account. So for us to have all the stakeholders be engaged in climate change policy decision-making, I feel that we need to have two-stage strategy. The first strategy is to really get into the people and try to share our understanding that climate change is really an urgent threat to our human beings. And in last month in June, we had a terribly hot days in Japan. And everybody was saying, oh, it's hot, but that was it. This month, we are seeing another horrible extreme weather events in other parts of the world, including Europe and the United States. And the leaders, political leaders, come to the podium and they say it is due to climate change and it is a threat to us. And I think that kind of communication by leaders, political leaders or business leaders, is very, very important to convey message about the danger of climate change. That's one. And the second stage is, after we share the idea that climate change is really a problem, then we'll try to see the synergies between climate change actions and different SDG goals, so that we can understand that reducing emissions or try to adapt to climate change is good for many other reasons other than climate change. Just for an example, inflation and rising oil prices or fossil fuel prices. Why don't we go for renewable energy much faster than we expected? In Japan, we export most of what we consume from outside the country. So it should be the most sustainable way for Japan to invest in renewable energy, and that's not happening in Japan. So that's really one example. So, so I just gave you an example of Japan, but so for each country, I must say that there should be another kind of having or finding nexus between different goals. And that will be a really the fastest way to fill the gap in terms of climate justice as well. So this is it for me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jessica, for introducing a real politics happening in Japan. So yeah, that's annoying, but we should overcome it. Thank you very much. So the next guest speaker participant here is Mr. Carl Sin, President of KSS Institute of Spatial Planning and Environment Research and CEO, 3R Waste Foundation, Gurgaon, India. So Carl, I listened to your speech yesterday. It's very brilliant, and I was impressed that the leader commitment for accelerating climate action SDGs is important. And also you say the mechanism to facilitate, to disseminate low carbon technology. Yes, I agree with it. And today I'd like to know where and what kinds of gaps and needs exist in your home country for integrating climate action and social agenda. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I come from India, a country with, I would say that 1,350 million people. And our challenges are really, really very, very different. While we address the issue of climate change or achieving the sustainable development goals in the country. In fact, you have asked me to address some of those issues relating to the inclusiveness in the just transition, equity, and of course, role of education and capacity building also to close the gap. But I would like to say that while in India, we are trying to implement the sustainable development goals on one side quite seriously, at the same time, there is a kind of commitment at the highest level for meeting the climate change commitments that we made in Paris. But we have very different kind of issues. If I may say, we talk of just transition, which basically means greening the economy in a way that is as fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. But if I may just state that we are a country where every month 1 million people enter the work market, job market, and you need 12 million, jobs or 12 million, I think, employment opportunities or work opportunities in 1 year. Therefore, as a matter of fact, there is a kind of different kind of approach that we have really taken, if I may say so, with respect to dealing with the issues. I'll just first touch upon some of the issues with respect to the sustainable development goals and how we are dealing with the issue of inclusiveness. Let's say first, basically goal is with respect to elimination of poverty. On this issue, we have been trying to address this issue, I would say that for last several decades. It just didn't start with the sustainable development goals, but it started, I would say that almost like 50 years ago when we started addressing this issue. The second issue is relating to the hunger issue, basically that. I'll just give you a very interesting situation that we had during the pandemic. During the pandemic, the economic activity in the country came to a sudden halt. And therefore, as a matter of fact, the government decided to provide, I would say, direct supply to the weaker sections by supplying them wheat per month, 5 kg per person, or even lentils, or for that matter, other basic necessities directly, not to a small number, to 800 million people every year. So addressing the issue of, I would say that sustainable development goals, as a matter of fact, it's not very easy, but yes, we are really trying hard in this regard. Issue of, I would say, health became significantly important during the pandemic when, as a matter of fact, we tried to deal with the issue significantly. Then came the issue of, I would say, gender, women empowerment. May I just like to say that gender has really been playing a very vital role through various schemes of the government of India or state governments. We are a country with 28 states. We are a country with almost like, I would say that 5,000 local governments, urban local governments, and urban local bodies, as we call them, or municipal governments. And we have in all almost like 650,000 villages where local governments are there. The numbers are not small. So they are trying to address those issues and implement some of those schemes which they have really started. I would like to say that some of these schemes are really very positive, but some of these schemes basically are policies which are also negative. And I like to give you one or two examples in this regard. If I may just take one scheme where, as a matter of fact, it can be learned by, or as a matter of fact, I won't call it a best practice, but as a good practice, simply because there is a lot of unemployment opportunity, a lot of unemployment in the rural areas also. Long back, we started a scheme, what is called Manrega scheme, which actually ensures minimum 100 days employment, and per day employment rate is also fixed, and there is a support from the central government in this regard. And the idea is that, people get employment enough that they survive. Okay. This is a very important scheme. It started somewhere in 2004, 2005. It has, while the national government changed in 2014, we got another political party, but then they have continued with this scheme simply because they find there is no alternative to that. And we have to address the issue of poverty. Related with that is the employment and like that. And it's a very positive scheme. It gives a lot of opportunities and it helps building the infrastructure in rural areas. Because those who are given the employment, they are being utilized for creating infrastructure, for better water management schemes and things like that. I also would like to mention that there are other schemes like, for example, Education for All is one scheme which actually at a national level, we have the act which was passed for food security. Under that actually all these, some of that, distribution of wheat or distribution of rice or distribution of others was really started for that matter. But I like to also give you a negative example where we are really having a problem. And that negative example is impacting, I would say that the climate. It is impacting where, as a matter of fact, we need to change our policies significantly. As you know that urban transport, as a matter of fact, consumes a lot of energy, almost like 25, 27% of the energy of the country is utilized in the urban transport per se. But then in the urban transport, we have not looked at how to make it sustainable. Public transport is almost negligible in most of our cities. We have almost like, as I mentioned to you, 5,000 cities and towns. Public transport is almost negligible. At the same time, people are using cars. I come from a city called City of Delhi, which is the capital city, where not more than 10 to 15% people have got cars. 40% people use, I would say, public transport, whatever is available. Well, city of Delhi does have public transport. I would say we have now got a metro. We also have got, the bus transport systems. But the remaining, if I may just say, my dear sir, that the remaining use pedestrianization, walking several kilometers for reaching for the work, or remaining using cycle, which is also very significantly important. But as a matter of fact, we have not planned anything like dedicated cycle paths or dedicated pedestrian paths so that people can walk safely. As a result of that, we have almost like 150,000 deaths every year on road. And we are using so much of, just for want of public transport. Importantly, we are using so much of energy, which is also creating a lot of environment pollution. It's not just that we are actually creating a lot of emissions. We are also having, I would say, basically environment pollution, and Delhi being where I live, one of the most polluted cities in the world. Coming back, I would like to just say there are so many positive examples, but there are so many negative examples where policy changes are there. When we raise a voice on that, the problem is our Minister of Finance gets worried. And the reason being, it is the automobile sector which contributes 8% to our GDP. If 8% of the GDP gets affected by reducing the number of cars on road, they get worried on that. So one has to really think of some of the interesting kind of policy scenario by which we are able to address that the only way is improving the public transport system, having dedicated cycle paths, having sustainable transport mechanism so that we are able to address those issues. One interesting example I'll also add on before I really close on to that, and that is, as you know, that Millennium Development Goals would not achieve the sanitation target in the world. And basically the main reason was both India and China did not achieve their targets. But we started ensuring that, the sanitation target must be achieved at the earliest possible. And we tried to provide a toilet facility, let us say, to every household by 2019, right? And we constructed almost like, if I may say so, 12 million toilets, with government support, with support coming from other stakeholders and like that. But what have we done? We have, I would say that, created those toilets, what we call single pit or twin pit latrines that we have created. But there is no way when we empty out those single pit or twin pit latrines periodically, we have no way, we do not have the technology which is available for managing that septage, and that creates more problems, both in terms of, I would say, emissions, CO2 or like that, there are problems. So what I am only trying to give a message is that, yes, there are a lot of good efforts which are happening. At the same time, there are a lot of policy problems. At the same time, there are technological issues. Last point with which I would like to conclude is that one of the issues you said, how can the participation of the decision-making processes on climate action and SDGs be facilitated? We live in a political economy. Politics play a very vital role. And to give and to empower some of the weaker sections, sometimes, as a matter of fact, we give them I would say that a different kind of role. Currently, we are going to elect our President of India, the highest level of the position. And now the ruling party has actually chosen a candidate which represents the tribal community, which represents, I would say that, a very weaker section. So by actually electing the person at that level, the message is you are trying to empower those communities in a very big way. So those are the kind of political interventions, political approaches, but at the same time, economic approaches also, which as a matter of fact are there. I'll stop at that, but I like to say that the journey is very long for SDGs, and so is the journey for climate change actions, perhaps I think, but we as a country do stand committed at different levels. And last word, role of capacity building is very significantly important. You have several schemes. People are not aware of those schemes to get the benefit. And that is where the role of capacity building, training, awareness creation, advocacy is significantly important. We do have institutions, both in the government as well as in the NGO sector, and where private sector is also playing a very vital. But capacity building is certainly the underlying factor in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for introducing the reality, the challenges in your country on the issue of synergies. So the next guest, again online, so I'd like to invite Ms. Kelly Takaya King, council member in Maui County, Hawaii, United States. Hi, Kelly-san, can you hear my voice? Hello.
Aloha, I can.
Saring, thank you very much for joining us again. So, so I'd like to give you a floor. So I think you already know the point of discussion. So directly giving a floor to you. Thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me and for allowing me to speak on these important issues. Basically, the first question is how can win-win-win solutions and just transitions be better developed so that all stakeholders can expect to benefit? And this is an important question. We've kind of gone halfway there with in the United States where we're at, especially in Maui County. It's very important to create shared visions, shared strategies, a shared set of core principles. And interestingly, when I first ran for county council about 7 years ago, when I was campaigning for my first term on the county council, that's one of the things I locked onto is why don't we have a shared set of principles that we can agree on from which we can create these actions. And as I was investigating that and researching, I found that we have this document called our Countywide Policy Plan. And this document has a shared vision. It was worked on by maybe a couple of thousand stakeholders over a period of 4 to 5 years. So this was something that had a lot of man hours into it. And there's a shared vision. There's a set of key strategies. There's a set of core principles. And I wanted to read to you the first core principles because out of the 10, the first core principle is excellence in the stewardship of the natural environment and cultural resources. Nobody knows about this. That's what's so interesting is that this is a really important document. Every council member and the mayor should be using this document to make decisions, to create a policy and legislation and administrative rules. But most people I talk to right now don't even know that this document exists. So it's an important document that is adopted into the Maui County Code. So that makes it a county law. And it's supposed to carry us through the year 2030. It was adopted in 2010. It's a 20-year plan. What I find is that we need consistent messaging of this plan. We need updates of this plan. We need to bring in we're into the next generation now who knows nothing about this plan. And most of the people who are active weren't even involved in putting together this plan. But I find that I think that for me, making decisions at the council level, this is my Bible. And I don't see any of my colleagues on the county council using this document. So that tells you that in this day and age, the things that are on people's minds are the things that they just heard about on social media or on television, the things that are put in front of them on a daily basis. It really needs to be a marketing plan to keep this kind of information in front of the public eye. And what you need when you're trying to pass a lot of, and this was in the question, why is there so much pushback against some of these environmental measures from special interests? Because they don't see the public stepping up and getting behind these bold decisions. When we do polls, we find in the United States that the public sentiment is overwhelmingly in favor of women's choice. And yet we just saw the Supreme Court overturn that. We see that the public sentiment is overwhelmingly in favor of gun control. And yet they keep electing public officials who won't pass gun control laws. So there's a disconnect between what the public will tell you they believe in and what they will actually do to support those beliefs. That's where the messaging needs to come in. That needs to be a constant messaging that here are the actions we can take. If you believe in these things, here are the actions we can take to make them reality. I also heard somebody earlier talk about the public need, understanding the needs of stakeholders. And that's really a key point of this, because if you can't get your basic needs met, you're not going to care about climate change or some of these bigger issues like gun control. If you're hungry, it's hard to care about these things. If you're living on the streets and you don't have a home, because you don't have shelter because you're sleeping in your car and you can't afford we have just the average home on Maui is over $1 million. So if you can't even meet your basic needs, it's hard for you to take action on some of these things that you don't see as affecting you today: climate change, environmental protection. We're trying to protect the wetlands and the watersheds and our reef system here in Maui. And, what I've been trying to do because I chair the Climate Action, Resilience, and Environment Committee, is I'm trying to put the education out there and hold town halls so that we can touch people where they live and we can explain to them why these things are important to them, how they will affect them and, yourself and your neighbors. If we don't protect the reef is our first defense against erosion. And if you live near the ocean, your house is going to start eroding in the next 10 to 15 years. Our wetlands are our first defense against flooding. And we've seen massive flooding from storms that are caused by climate action or climate disasters. So it's important to, and I'm actually in a position, I was just urged in the last few days of the filing deadline to run for mayor. And one of the reasons I'm transitioning from policymaking into administration is because I don't see these public needs being met. And I don't think we're going to get to policy to protect our environment, to enact climate change mitigations, and even to budget for disaster relief. What are our reactions going to be? What are our disaster mitigations once something has happened, once we've had a major fire or a storm that's caused by climate change? I don't see the public sentiment being there because their basic needs aren't met. So we need not just meeting the public needs, but efficiency in government. And, people are complaining more about lack of efficiency in government than they are about lack of action for climate change. And that's got to change. It's not that difficult if you have a customer service attitude to take care of people's basic needs, but we just don't see that a lot. We see a lot of politicizing of the actions of the administration, and usually the corporations or the big developers are the ones that are getting their needs met over the average person. So we need, I see that as a real sticking point. We're starting to talk about the circular economy as a way into a just transition. And this is something that should absolutely be important to every person, because a circular economy means that we're using and reusing our own resources to make goods and services in our community that we can use and we can sell here and keep the revenue local. For a community like Maui and most tourists, especially island tourist communities, a lot of our economy is extractive. So we see these big chain hotels coming in here and setting up shop, and they take a lot of money out of our community. We see multimillionaires, and Jeff Bezos just bought 4 homes in Maui County. So we see these multimillionaires coming into our communities, driving up the price of housing, and they're not really living here. they're leasing out their homes or they're giving their friends a place to stay when they come here. We have a lot of extractive commerce here that pulls money out of our community where the local people don't see a benefit. So that should be one of our focuses is how do we engage people and make them understand how important the circular economy is, and then from there, what part does climate action take in the circular economy? This is one of the looking at long-term benefits versus the immediate. You know, when you talk about the price of fuel, people are tracking the price of at the gas pump up and down on a daily basis. But what we really should be looking at is the long-term benefits of renewable energy, because fossil fuel will go up and down on a daily basis at the pump. But renewable energy, we can prove out the long-term benefits of renewable energy because it's stable. It's a stable source we use to make renewable energy, and it can be a stable price at the pump if we're not pricing it against the cost of petroleum on a daily basis. That's a long-term benefit, but we've got too many people focused on the short-term daily benefits of, you know, what's the price of fuel today? What's the price of a loaf of bread today? The other thing I want to bring up is in the realm of, and I saw this at COP26, in the realm of climate change, we're being very decisive or very divisive politically. Somehow climate change has become a Democratic issue an issue of the Democrats in the US, and the anti-climate change is the Republicans. So we missed a big opportunity, and I've been talking to people about this for COP27. There are Republicans in our US Senate and in our US House of Representatives who believe in climate change and who understand how important it is to do mitigations. Maybe not very many of them, but the few that there are there should be invited to join us at the next COP. They should be given a podium and a stage and a chance to speak about it, because that will only strengthen their resolve to do something about climate change if they get an international stage, you know, and a podium to speak about their beliefs. They will come back and they will continue that messaging. Once you've had a global stage to talk about these things, it's very hard to come back to your community and say, I don't believe in it. And that's one of the areas where, you know, we need to reach across the aisle, and we need to bring people who on the surface are parts of groups who don't want climate action, but maybe beneath all that, they really do believe in it because they have families, because they are worried about the next generation. So I think there needs to be more reaching out to the folks who on the surface seem like they're against us working on climate change and climate action, but maybe could be persuaded if they were brought into the club, so to speak. You know, we kind of have to stop this idea that we're this exclusive club of people who want climate action, and then there's the opposing factor. And I really think we need to start integrating those who seem like they are on the opposite side into the messaging and bring them into the fold and give them that global stage to speak on. And I think we will see coming together around these issues a little bit more than where we've been right now. And I'll stop there because I think so much has been said about some of the issues I've talked about in other issues. But I really appreciate the chance to speak about these issues, because I think we have every conference like this is an opportunity to reach out and bring in more people. And we have to stop singing to the choir, so to speak, you know, just talking to ourselves. We've got to start bringing in the other side. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and mahalo.
Thank you very much, Katie. Very important message on the reality on the difficult, complex decision-making mechanism in your country, but not only in your country. I has Yasuko made a same message. It's quite difficult politics in Japan. So directed by the last speaker, but let me allow to extend this session a little bit. I'd like to ask all speakers to say 2 minutes intervention before closing. So the last speaker, not yet spoken, is Mrs. Cassie Notstein, head of Future Cities, coordinator of Climate Smart City Challenge, Nesta Charity Foundation of UK. Cassie, can you hear my voice? Hello?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I know that you're engaged in the social actions to support people in the UK. So from the context of climate change action and social supports, I'd like to hear your comments. Floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to have to keep my remarks all rolled together into one because I won't be able to stay later after except I have to leave on time is what I'm trying to say. But thank you very much for having me here. My name is Kathy and I work with Nesta. Nesta is a independent global innovation foundation. We're based in London and we drive innovation for the public good. I lead our work on cities and we focus on running challenge prizes, open innovation competitions to support inclusive and sustainable innovation in cities. So we look at this through a lens of how do we include and empower people and empower communities in shaping their futures. The topics that we've worked on range from sustainable mobility to energy, urban planning, the future of freight, tech. We place a large emphasis on kind of the future of technology in cities and smart cities and how they can be leveraged to shape sustainable and equitable outcomes for people. We know that cities represent one of humanity's greatest defenses against the climate crisis. They are centers of innovation, knowledge sharing. They can offer models of breakthrough technology. Cities are global economic engines. But systematically changing how we build and run our cities will have immense global impact in terms of both climate resilience and climate adaptation. We urgently need to explore and scale better ways to build homes, to run our businesses, and to improve how people and goods get around. What we found is that too often technologies are developed in a vacuum. City governments and regulators, and indeed the general public, are often left to work out how to make a city accommodate new technologies rather than being on the front foot. But we think that cities and the people who live in them should be empowered to shape innovation to create the kind of futures they want. I mean, we know that we are lucky to have these amazing opportunities with emerging technologies such as AI and IoT that could help improve the lives of people living in cities, could help improve how city and county councils do their business, boost productivity. But we think it's important to harness these opportunities by convening stakeholders, including often those who aren't usually at the table. So whether it's local governments, regulators, innovators, businesses, and of course the actual public and the communities that would be affected. We also think that if the public isn't involved in shaping these two technologies, that security may not be taken seriously, concerns about privacy and trust. We know that local leaders are under pressure to improve and deliver services to the communities. Everyone's facing the cost of living crisis right now, coming out of COVID, that there's real pressure on local governments to serve their communities effectively. And we've seen local governments become more and more innovative in providing services because they have to be, because they're at the front lines, right, of serving communities, both in the short term and then addressing the longer term consequences of a changing climate. So two things I wanted to focus on was first about how underrepresented stakeholder groups can be empowered. What we find is working with cities as a test bed, as a living lab to engage innovators, to co-create solutions, to demonstrate and scale them. One example I'll give, which was mentioned, was the Climate Smart Cities Challenge that we've run with UN Habitat and a number of other organizations. It's an open innovation collaborative engagement to invite people to collaborate with city agencies. What we did was we collaborated with 4 cities around the world to define open innovation challenges in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and creating more thriving communities. So working with Bogota around AI platforms and digital modeling tools to improve the efficiency of the freight sector and reduce emissions. We're working with Bristol and with a city in Kampala, Uganda, to address affordable, eco-friendly housing. In Curitiba, we've been working with a number of creative companies around tech and energy and mobility and the circular economy. And what we think is important about this approach is that using an open innovation approach is a way to invite unusual suspects who have good ideas or have relevant technology that's not typically kind of involved in sort of local government or city procurement processes that don't often have a chance to kind of engage with governments, engage with cities, is a good way to bring in these unusual suspects, to bring in kind of emerging tech experts or other types of innovators that can engage with the beneficiaries and ultimately with the end users to provide input on problems and outcomes that they want to see. Another thing that I'll talk about is the idea of knowledge platforms, capacity building across cities and across organizations. We know, speaking from the city's perspective, we know that cities and local governments are keen to learn from one another. There's strong evidence and potential to better foster knowledge sharing among cities. Again, in the Climate Smart Cities Challenge, we've been working with cities around the world and drawing connections between cities that on their face are very different, but are facing similar barriers to advancing net zero goals. Another example I'll mention is something called the Flying High Challenge that we ran with cities in the UK, in Europe, and worked with others further afield in Africa and Australia to engage cities in developing public use urban drone services for social good, because we heard, a lot of tech companies were talking about the potential of, eVTOL and UAV services. But we thought it was important that the public is involved in deciding if and how drones should be flying around their cities, and if they would be, what kind of services could they provide? Could they be supportive of public health services, of delivering emergency medicine, at responding to emergency scenarios, rather than purely kind of commercial applications? So through that initiative, we're able to engage cities and the people who live in them with technologists, with government officials, with decision makers to try to shape this sector in a way that can serve the public good. So I'll wrap up by saying, we think that there are massive opportunities that tech and innovation can bring to cities. Cities obviously have real challenges that they're facing and urgent responsibilities to their constituents. And we think that city residents should be engaged in open collaborative processes to shape innovation, to shape tech applications and climate solutions from their inception. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cassie, for your leadership in the decarbonization action in your country. So thank you very much, all speakers, for your patience. So lastly, I'd like to invite all speakers to say a few words, just 1 minute. I'd like to ask first Deborah, so for your final comments, floor is yours. If you're still connected, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm honored to share this panel. I think just doing a recap of the whole panel, we can say that equity and justice should be at the front and center of all decisions, both for climate action and sustainable development, that there are many examples that have been listed of how climate action can complement the sustainable development. The sustainable development goals, of course, understanding specific contexts and keeping in mind the different enablers that we have. Also, that societal choices are important, that they need to be a continuous process. And lastly, that we really need to think of, when we say for all, what does the sustainable development for all really means? When we say leave no one behind, what does that no one behind? Because whenever we think of specific projects or we have goals, we talk about specific metrics of how much we reduce risk or how many people we're benefiting. What happens to the rest? And that's exactly at the center of equity, ethics, and inclusion. And we really need to think of these terms and what they mean, and not just use them as buzzwords. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for joining us. Good evening. So the next, Ms. Kamal Gay, you're still on?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I think for me, the last word is that the social dimensions of both achieving the SDGs and the Paris agreements are part of policy objectives. They should not be a second thought, and these are important enablers of ambition. And when we speak about just transition, it obviously is more than managing the job creation and the job losses, because the transitions we're talking about are deep economic and social transformations. So they touch upon prospects of development of countries, prosperity. So it goes beyond jobs. And I want to end by saying that this is why the ILO tripartite constituents, workers, governments, and employers have decided to discuss at the International Labour Conference next year the theme of a just transition, including industrial policy and technology, because industrial policies and technology will have to be important dimensions of just transition. Just to end and respond also to a question that was raised, it is beyond jobs. It's about achieving environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Tafa. So the next person is speaker is Ms. Parimita. If you're here.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah. In addition to what other speakers have already mentioned, I think one important point is it's a more continuous process. It's not, and it has to be done in a more cross-sectoral way and should not be done in an isolation. So my point is, how can we create a more multi-stakeholder, cross-sectoral, continuous interventions to bring ownership and sustainability to all the interventions that would be done? And how can we create need-based solutions in order to bring more ownership and equitable just transitions? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Kelly-san.
Thank you for giving me another minute. Wow, what great speakers we've had today. You know, I want to back up what Debbie Lay said, because I think the definitions are so important, and we have these lofty definitions of words like sustainability, equity, and justice, even the circular economy, but the average person doesn't know what that means to them. So rather than just say sustainability is the avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance, what does that mean for the average person? It means that the reason we have a law that bans chemical sunscreens is because we need to protect the reef, because that's our first defense against erosion. So defining these terms in ways that people can understand how it affects their daily lives, I think is extremely important. And maybe that could be something that the UN could work on with the SDGs, is getting people in a room and saying, what does that mean to you? What does the circular economy mean to you? That your business is going to be supported locally because you're using local resources and you're providing local goods and services. And then the last thing I wanted to end with this statement by the Public Citizen, which is a nonprofit in the US. And it goes like this: we are going to face hard realities and challenges and meet them with love, solidarity, unity, and the hope that comes from knowing that together we have power and we will make a better day. Mahalo nui loa.
Very much, Carrie-san. So Ms. Cassie Nostine is already left. So now I'd like to give the floor to the on-site speakers. Start with Yasko.
Okay, thank you. Let me give another point that has not been raised by all the panelists today, is about the importance of taking into account the intergenerational equity. Because usually when we talk about the social justice, people mostly focus on the equity issue between people who live today in this world. But climate change is really a long-term issue, and when we talk about just transition, it's really a matter of what we will be leaving for the next generation. So I felt that Kelly, she mentioned about the short-termism, and I think that's really the important part. how we can really change the decision-making process or institution in a way to be able to take into account what we can leave for the future generation. And in terms of the situation in Japan, there's another issue because the young generations are less interested in climate change than the senior aged people in Japan. The grandfather and grandmother wants to save the world for their grandsons and daughters, but the young generation doesn't care about it. So, so again, that's one thing I wanted to point out. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So, Karwant, and followed by Dr. Yamaguchi.
Thank you so much. I think I would like to say that the common man has started understanding also the meaning of climate change, because we in India are facing a lot of floods, also droughts and extreme weather situations. And therefore, the meaning of climate change is really being understood. However, the concerned stakeholder for implementing the mitigation part is mainly the government in any case. Therefore, I would say whether they are sustainable development goals or it is the climate change, basically actions, climate actions, they need to be regularly monitored. The monitoring system must be kept in place so that we try to find that, the actions that are getting taken, there are no conflicting situations and there is a kind of synergy that gets created. And that's what I would like to say and conclude.
Yeah, thank you very much. So last year, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Yamaguchi for
And
closing.
thank you very just quickly, because I think we have really had very profound and significant discussion from the presenter. At the beginning, in my opening, I mentioned that we really want to identify gaps in knowledge between climate and action and SDGs. But I think from this session, we have learned much more than that. Yeah, I think one of the messages I really received from the Dr. Kameyama is we all understand, those who are here, the importance of those synergies and gaps. But once we're stepping out of this building, what is the reality? And this is something that the expert, has to be aware, so that how we could really reach out to the public to make things happen. So we talked about the local community, we talked about multi-stakeholders. They are the ones who really need to take an action. Okay, but we also have to realize, what is the reality that we are facing right now. Okay? And I also learned, I think at the UN system, we got the homework to think and understand and reach out to the public to ask the question, what does it mean to you to have a climate action? What does it mean to you to make a changes, which is the benefit to you? Okay, I think it's a very simple question, but it's a very core question that we as a UN organization and academia and public policy maker have to rethink and revisit once again. Okay, so it was really, really learning opportunity for me, and I hope for all the audience, what we have discussed today. And thank you very much for attending this panel session. And we really hoped we could have a Q&A sessions, but I think we will continue this discussion toward the COP27 and beyond. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation.
Thank you very much. Let's close the meeting. So please give a big hand to distinguished speakers. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.